The self-determination theory, SDT, serves as a framework, examining the innate human drive towards growth and the fulfillment of psychological needs. Emphasizing the importance of personal choice and influence, it assesses how individuals drive their own actions even when external factors are removed. In the 1970s, research began comparing intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, giving rise to a new understanding of how deeply ingrained intrinsic motivation was in controlling human behavior. SDT gained recognition as a substantial empirical theory after the publication of Intrinsic Motivation and Self-Determination in Human Behavior by Edward L.D.C. and Richard Ryan in the mid-1980s. The 21st century has seen a surge in practical research and application of ZT. Intrinsic motivation, or the impetus to partake in an activity purely for its own pleasure and satisfaction, became a significant factor in the development of the theory. The transformation of an external motive into a personal value, or internalization, was a crucial concept to understand the motivations within human nature. DC and Ryan identified three fundamental needs underlying our self-driven actions: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Catering to these needs is essential for mental health and well-being. The principles of humanistic psychology significantly influence that. This branch of psychology focuses on individual psyche and achievement of self-efficacy and self-actualization. Proper satisfaction of these elements can directly impact a person's motivation. SDT recognizes the criticality of balancing intrinsic and extrinsic motivations in the pursuit of a goal. While external motivations and external influencers like mentors or therapists can aid in this journey, SDT emphasizes that it is ultimately the individual who must discover their personal why behind their ambition, as noted by Sheldon E.L. Those embracing the principles of self-determination accept the boundaries of their roles, accepting that, in the end, individuals must guide their own choices. Hence, understanding and identifying the personal reasons for staying motivated to achieve set goals becomes crucial. Personal agency is essential in defining our choices and controlling our life, signifying a level of self-determination. Key theories discuss the various ways this can play out in our lives. Cognitive evaluation theory, CET, discusses how our internal motivation is influenced by external rewards. If these rewards are controlling, they diminish our internal drive. Conversely, when they offer feedback on our actions, our internal motivation is increased. Orgasmic integration theory, OIT, elaborates on various extrinsic motivations and their role in individual socialization. This theory acknowledges that people often participate willingly in not so enjoyable activities due to external motivators. Causality orientations theory, COD, looks into diverse ways people find motivation based on their personality. The theory outlines three different orientations toward decision making based on the motivations behind an individual's choices. Basic needs theory, BANG, recognizes three psychological needs tied to intrinsic motivation and psychological wellness. These include autonomy, an individual's belief in their power to choose; competence, one's ability to effectively interact with their environment; and relatedness, the need for strong relationships. Finally, goal contents theory, GT, analyses the positive effects of intrinsic goals and the negative outcomes of external goals on psychological health. This theory argues that individuals driven by intrinsic goals and personal need fulfillment experience satisfaction, whereas those driven by external validation do not. From the perspective of orgasmic dialectics, it's viewed that every human being is a dynamic organism, constantly interacting with their surroundings. In this vigorous engagement with life, people are continually growing, overcoming hurdles and curating fresh experiences while attempting self-unification. People also integrate within larger societal structures. Self-determination theory, SD, intimates that there are inherent psychological needs at the core of our personalities, which fuel self-motivation and internal cohesion. It postulates the idea that people consistently seek fulfillment in their pursuit of life's meaning. This quest for purpose imbues them with a sense of self-worth and enhances their understanding of the world around them. D doesn't just pay heed to individuals' inherent psychological needs, but also takes into account the aspirations pursued and the consequent effects and outcomes. A sub-theory of SD further proposes three cardinal psychological needs that are crucial to a person's well-being and holistic health. These needs, relating to autonomy, competence, and interconnectedness, are ubiquitously applicable. They're ubiquitously applicable. Nevertheless, Particular needs may hold greater relevance during different phases of life, shaped by the passage of time, cultural influences, or personal experiences. EST also earmarks three inherent needs, the fulfillment of which is key to enabling optimal growth and enhanced functioning. Firstly, the aspiration to have personal control over one's life and to resonate with one's true self, denoting a sense of psychological liberty and volitional freedom. This isn't to be detached from others, but rather a profound sense of personal freedom when a person is propelled by self-governed motivation. Their overall performance, wellness, and zeal thrive compared to someone who is merely compliant. DC's research suggested that introducing external rewards for intrinsically motivated behaviors dilutes the intrinsic motivation, fostering indifference. In fact, other external contingents also lead to erosion of such motivation, as observed by Amabile, Dejong, and Lepper research, for example. The imposition of deadlines can curtail and dominate an individual, draining their intrinsic motivation. Contrastingly, situations that bestow autonomy rather than confiscate it have a positive correlation with motivation. Investigations into the aspect of choices have revealed that enhancing an individual's available options positively impacts their intrinsic motivation. Lebeck and Schnedler's research further demonstrated people's willingness to pay for the satisfaction of having personally influenced an outcome. Moreover, the gratification or deprivation of autonomy can impinge on individual motivation, personal growth, and behavioral changes, and in turn dictating well-being or distress. Research conducted by Valorant and Reed indicates that negative feedback can negatively impact individuals by decreasing their intrinsic motivation. It essentially challenges their inherent need for competence. Concurrently, a study spearheaded by Felnhofer et al. Investigated how the perception of competence and its attribution varies with age, gender, and attitude within a society. It was discovered that these variances can contribute to a detrimental influence on intrinsic motivation. In their work concerning the bonds between infant styles of attachment and their proclivity for mastery-oriented behavior, Frody, Bridges, and Grolnick couldn't find any substantial impacts. They suggest that more extensive sample sizes might reveal hidden associations nonetheless. They observed a hint that children with secure and stable attachment styles outperform their insecure counterparts on measures of mastery. The established theory proposed by DC and Ryan suggests three fundamental elements. Humans have a natural propensity for the mastery of inner forces like emotions and drives. We are inherently inclined towards growth and integrated functioning, and while optimal development and actions might be ingrained in humans, they don't necessarily happen automatically. Further research into adolescent relatedness revealed that feelings of satisfaction or frustration based on social connection can influence behavior. Satisfaction from relationships can enhance psychological well-being and further developmental growth, while frustration from lack of connection can thwart this growth. This underlines the importance of a nurturing social environment for adolescents to realize their potential. When their needs are met, it results in positive outcomes such as well-being and personal growth. On the contrary, unmet needs can lead to dissatisfaction and deprivation, thereby disrupting the principles of the self-determination theory. SDE affirms that humans inherently strive towards positive motivation, growth, and self-fulfillment, propounding a unique approach to examining motivation. White and Descharmes argue that the need for competence and autonomy forms the foundation for intrinsic motivation and behavior. This theory thus forms a critical link between individuals' basic needs and their motivation. The cognitive evaluation theory, CEAT, emphasizes the importance of competence and autonomy in fostering intrinsic motivation. This theory suggests that social cues such as work feedback and rewards can enhance feelings of competence, thus boosting intrinsic motivation. Studies confirm that positive feedback increases while negative feedback diminishes intrinsic motivation. Additionally, a sense of control was found to mediate these effects. However, autonomy, alongside competence, is required for individuals to perceive their actions as self-determined via intrinsic motivation conditions. Highlighting these needs or prior internal resources should support this process. Cat also posits that a sense of security and relatedness can enhance intrinsic motivation. Lower intrinsic motivation in children was associated with perceptions of uncaring teachers, indicating the need for relatedness. Studies suggest a correlation between intrinsic motivation and academic performance, emphasizing the importance of fostering intrinsic motivation from an early age. Extrinsic motivation derived from external sources is explained by organismic integration theory. Oit, a subtheory of self-determination theory. SDT OIT outlines 4 types of extrinsic motivation and their regulatory contexts, which affect their internalization and integration into the self. These types include externally regulated behavior driven by external rewards or demands, and introjected regulation of behavior, where regulations are adopted but not fully internalized, often driven by self-esteem or ego. The latter motivation represents actions performed to maintain self-worth, though the causality is perceived as external, making them non-self-determined. Lastly, regulation through identification, an autonomous form of extrinsic motivation, involve consciously valuing goals or regulations, marking the actions as personally significant. Ryan, Stiller, and Lynch discovered that kids absorb the academic rules when they experience a sense of security and affection from parents and educators. They also established a link between competence and the assimilation of external motivation. According to orgasmic integration theory, OIT, feeling proficient in certain tasks can boost the internalization of those activities. Autonomy assumes a pivotal role when one attempts to add these regulations into their self-identity. To do so, a person needs to feel competent, connected, and autonomous in a supportive external environment. Furthermore, they should comprehend these regulations in relation to their objectives to enhance their sense of autonomy. D.C. Egrari, Patrick, and Leone confirmed this through laboratory trials, discovering that when people were given a meaningful rationale for tedious conduct alongside support for their autonomy and connectedness, they internalized and integrated their actions. Self-determination theory, SD, posits that while needs are innate, they can also be socially developed or picked up from varied life experiences and outside influences. People may develop more robust needs than others, leading to variations in people's needs, be it autonomy, connectedness, or competence. However, according to this theory, individual disparities center on concepts deriving from whether needs have been met or not, potentially leading to either satisfaction or frustration. The results of this can be positive or negative and differ from person to person, based on their specific need. STE identifies 2 broad individual differences: causality orientations and life goals. Causality orientations, motivational tendencies, are defined as how people interact with and adapt to their surroundings and manage their behavior based on these changes in essence. It is the extent to which people feel self-determined across various contexts. STE identifies 3 types of orientations: autonomous, controlled, and impersonal, which facilitate our understanding of the consequences of environmental interactions. The orientation harbored by an individual dictates their adaptation. Those with autonomous orientations are driven by the fulfillment of basic needs. Their interactions and adaptations center on satisfying these needs. Different environments may demand more conscious effort to achieve their needs, and they will adjust their behaviors accordingly. On the other hand, strong controlled orientations stem from competence and relatedness needs, omitting autonomy, connecting regulation through internal and external contingencies. This leads to rigid functionality and reduced well-being, typically resulting in negative outcomes rather than positive ones. People establish life goals to direct their activities, which differ based on personal circumstances and desires, each having varying timeframes for achievement. Some of these goals may take a few years to reach, whereas others may span decades or even an entire lifetime. These aspirations can be broadly divided into intrinsic and extrinsic categories. Intrinsic goals involve self-fulfillment and personal growth such as affiliation, generativity, and self-development. Research suggests that these goals are linked to increased health, well-being, and performance, possibly due to their dependence on internal motivation rather than external factors. Notably, these values-based goals often align with deep-seated individual needs, like the need for relatedness. Extrinsic goals are materially oriented and include objectives like attaining wealth, fame, or physical attractiveness. These might cater to a person's competence needs. An individual's life path and their ability to achieve their goals can be significantly influenced by their causal orientations or psychological inclinities, such as job engagement and resource availability. For instance, those with high autonomy or impersonal orientations might approach work engagement differently, which in turn would affect their work-related life goals. This intriguing interplay of intrinsic and extrinsic motivations was studied by DC, who conducted a series of experiments to explore how external rewards affect internal drive. His research was spurred by inconsistent earlier findings and developmental theories, investigating whether external rewards diminish or amplify internal motivation to partake in activities or tasks. This critically influences the pursuit and achievement of one's life goals, throwing light on the psychology of motivation and the road towards self-fulfillment. In the first laboratory experiment, a group of 24 psychology undergraduates was divided evenly into control and experimental groups. Over 3 separate sessions, these groups engaged with a Soma cube puzzle, an activity presumed inherently enjoyable to university students. The task required students to recreate 4 given configurations with the puzzle, all under timed conditions. During 2 of these sessions, the experimental group was paid $1 for each successfully completed configuration, while no reward was given during the 3rd session. Participants' motivation was measured by the amount of time they voluntarily spent on the puzzle during allotted free periods. The result was that when monetary rewards were offered, the students spent more time on the puzzle in their free choice time compared to when there was no reward. Notably, once the reward was withdrawn, their motivation dropped even lower than the initial session. This provided evidence that external monetary rewards could potentially decrease intrinsic motivation. In the follow-up field experiment, researchers observed 8 students working at a college newspaper, unaware of the observation. The task involved writing headlines for the newspaper under similar conditions. Interestingly, the findings were similar to those of the initial lab experiment, with the introduction and subsequent withdrawal of payment causing a noticeable reduction in the students' intrinsic motivation to perform the task. These experiments lend support to DC's hypothesis that external monetary rewards potentially undermine intrinsic motivation. This research explored the impact of verbal praise as an external reward on enhancing intrinsic motivation, contrasting it with monetary rewards. The hypothesis proposed that social approval, expressed through verbal reinforcement and positive feedback, could boost external motivation for tasks in which there was evident intrinsic interest. Crucially, this enhanced motivation was believed to persist even after the reward was no longer given. This hypothesis was supported by the results of the experiment IIE, in which students' performance improved noticeably in the final 3rd session compared to the first one. The data suggested that positive reinforcement in the form of verbal praise can successfully boost performance for those already intrinsically motivated, highlighting the effectiveness of verbal praise as an external reward to stimulate intrinsic motivation. The study uncovered distinctions between the effects of different rewards on inherent motivation. If a task is initially driven by intrinsic motivation and then a financial incentive is added, the subject may adjust their perception of the task's significance. Their motivation may become extrinsically driven and primarily focused on the financial gain. However, if verbal praise is used in the same context, it enhances intrinsic motivation as it's deemed free from external manipulation and allows the individual to retain the sense of pleasure in accomplishing the task. Autonomy. The rise in intrinsic motivation can be ascribed to positive reinforcement and an enhanced perceived control over the task accomplishment. In a parallel study by Pritchard and his team, they experimented DC's hypothesis about the role of external rewards in inhibiting intrinsic motivation. The experimental design involved a chess task. Participants were divided into 2 groups, and their time spent on the task was measured and considered as a parameter for intrinsic motivation. While the experimental group was informed about a temporary monetary reward for the most problems solved in a given time, the control group was not offered any reward. The results of this experiment further corroborated the primary hypothesis that verbal praise fosters intrinsic motivation more effectively than monetary rewards. The research revealed a compelling concept. External monetary rewards can actually dampen one's inherent enthusiasm towards a task. This concept was first proposed by DC and was supported by the experiment wherein participants in the stipend receiving group displayed reduced dedication to chess problem-solving tasks across 2 sessions, as opposed to those who received no financial compensation. Concurrent investigations work, exploring many other external influences that might hinder an individual's motivational drive. There's been a broader implementation of the principles of self-determination theory, SDT, in various facets of life, such as in the workplace, parenting, teaching, health, morality, even in the technology design. SDT's applicability has found its mark even in the realm of sports. In one study by Mersha et al., they accounted the impact of supportive peers and a motivational environment on individuals' pleasure derived from exercise. Through questionnaires and rating scales, They measured the motivational climate, satisfaction of basic psychological need, self-regulation, and self-determination, along with the level of enjoyment in exercising. Their analysis highlighted a positive correlation between supportive peers, a working environment focusing on teamwork and personal development, and the satisfaction of basic needs, motivation, and finally, enjoyment. Another study by Bazadniaya and colleagues looked at how the attitude of physical education teachers, whether supportive or controlling, could influence students' well-being, learning, performance, and persistence in physical activities beyond P classes. They found that students' perceived autonomy support positively affected their overall outcomes through satisfaction and frustration, autonomous motivation, whereas teachers' controlling behavior was linked to adverse effects on students' well-being and knowledge acquisition. In terms of physical activity, identified regulation seemed to maintain a more consistent connection with regular participation than mere intrinsic regulation, possibly due to the fact that physical activities often involve more routine or repetitive actions. Recent studies, however, suggest that different forms of motivation regulate varying intensities of activities, which could be context-dependent. For instance, high-frequency vigorous activity was tied to autonomous motivation, but not to controlled motivation in rural Uganda. However, in an urban disadvantaged South African population, only moderate physical activity correlated with autonomous motivation, not vigorous activity. The study also reported different relations between basic psychological needs and autonomous motivation across different environments. The author's research findings suggest that when individuals behave with mindfulness, their actions align with their personal values and interests. It also hints at the likelihood of autonomous action derived from personal enjoyment, enhancing mindful awareness of one's activities. Another topic of interest explored by self-determination theory, SDT, scholars is the interplay between subjective vitality and self-regulation. According to Ryan and DC, vitality refers to the energy, either directly or indirectly, provided to oneself by fundamental psychological needs, enabling autonomous actions. Though some theorists suggest self-regulation drains energy, SD researchers argue that this only holds true for controlled regulation. In contrast, autonomous regulation could invigorate. Ryan and his team used EATS-D to explain how weekends impact the well-being of the employed adult population. They found that individuals feel more well-rounded on weekends due to increased autonomy and a sense of greater relatedness in weekend activity. Research by Hyung-Shim Jang investigated the effectiveness of two prevalent motivational theories in explaining the impact of externally provided rationale on students' motivation, engagement, and learning during less engaging tasks. The study involved undergraduate students, 936, 108 women, 28 men, working on a fairly dull short lesson with half receiving rationale and the others not. Those provided with rationale exhibited more interest, commitment, and determination. 3 alternative explanatory models were tested using structural equation modeling, with only the SDD-based model effectively aiding student engagement and learning. The results underscored the importance of externally provided rationale to stimulate motivation for personally significant though uninteresting material. For educators, these findings highlight the potential of fostering students' motivation during less engaging tasks by emphasizing their value. Teachers, for instance, can make students see the value of what they might term uninteresting by articulating a rationale that illuminates the hidden importance of the lesson, explains why it's worth their effort, and clarifies how it can be beneficial. The school in question adopts an approach to education where students are viewed as independent and accountable individuals immersed in a community that exposes them to the complexity of life within a democratic framework. Indeed, Sudbury schools refrain from evaluations and comparisons, affirming they do not judge students or breach their right to privacy and self-determination. The schools encourage students to chart their own academic progress, embodying a philosophy of self-regulation that fosters authentic, lifelong learning. Self-determination theory, ESD, suggests that those who regard external circumstances as the primary cause of their actions are more likely to yield to peer pressure. Conversely, individuals who view themselves as autonomous are usually action initiators. Research investigating the link between SDD and alcohol consumption amongst college students show that those who externally attribute their actions tend to consume more alcohol due to social pressure. This theory isn't just secluded to drinking habits, but extends to healthy eating behaviors. Although research into the correlation between SDD and dietary regulation is in its infancy, studies conducted in higher-income environments have been largely supportive. One such study in a South African urban township found a connection between healthy eating habits and individuals who felt competent, supported by their community, and were internally motivated by their health values. Therefore, recognizing the intricate nature of this relationship is imperative, alongside the understanding that the approval of others might partially mediate the relationship between self-determination and certain behaviors. Markland, Ryan, Tobin, and Rolnick underscored the significance of self-determination theory, SDU, in mastering the intricacies of motivational interviewing, i.e., they suggest that ME promotes an environment supportive of autonomy, ensuring clients can identify their unique motivators. Vital in overcoming addiction notably, and my treatment group offered a more autonomy, encouraging atmosphere compared to regular support groups. A handful of studies probing the relationship between SDT and environmental behaviors pinpointed that intrinsic motivation is key to driving environmental behavior performance, also offering some explanations for the inefficacy of present intervention approaches. SDT emphasizes the psychological need for autonomy as a fundamental factor for understanding effective self-regulation and well-being. It's pertinent, therefore, that as more people adopt these services, improving both personal and collective well-being, we delve deeper into what primarily motivates consumers. This will help us enhance our understanding of how various motivations shape consumers' intentions to embrace transformative services. An examination of the relationship between types of motivation related to food and different meat consumption aspects, based on a survey among 1083 Dutch consumers, gives insights on how SDT can influence sustainable food choices. While environmental attitudes and knowledge often fail to predict behavior, it offers the notion that motivation can foretell behavior performance. Pelletier et al. Created a scale for environmental behavior motivation consisting of 24 statements aiming to answer why individuals were environmentally active. The scale showed a correlation between environmental awareness and intrinsic motivations. Intrinsically driven behaviors confirmed long-term persistence. Pelletier et al. Also implied that certain belief elements, helplessness, strategy, lack of capacity, and effort, were closely related to greater motivation. Conversely, self-determination showed a negative relationship with a motivation. The environment a motivation scale measures reasons for inactivity in the environment. Here, participants ranked 16 statements on a scale of 1-7, suggesting reasons for their environmental passivity. Osbaldiston and Sheldon's 2003 study emphasizes how perceived autonomy can inspire an individual to engage more frequently in environmental practices. The research involved 162 university students who were tasked with setting and acting on an environmental goal for 1 week. The degree of perceived autonomy, their success rate in accomplishing the set behavior, and their prospects of sustaining such practices were all assessed. The observations highlighted that those who felt a greater sense of personal autonomy exhibited a higher likelihood of not only successfully implementing these behaviors, but also maintaining them in the long run. Building upon the correlation between self-determination theory, SDD, and environmental practice, Pelletier and others suggest that efficacious interventions should highlight the significance of self-driven motivation in executing environmental behaviors.